Boyne, downtown and Marina area that are within the district boundaries. We contracted with an independent study group, the Concord Group, who performed the study. The study spanned June 17th through June 24th, 7-day period, and we expedited the study. It was completed by July 24th. This is the result of me doing my PowerPoint, so you won't see the headings until I told you about this stuff. But at any rate, next. Okay, so similar to what Rochelle shared, we identified 85 businesses within the impacted area, and part of the study, the way they extracted the impacts was to look at total commercial space of 241,000 square feet, and it includes the following mix of businesses. Next. So we assessed both the direct, indirect, and induced impacts. So the definition of direct impacts are the lost revenue directly to the local business. So those are the receipts that were not collected. For example, a restaurant, whatever their average sales would have been on a given day, they would have missed that. And unfortunately, that was also Father's Day weekend, I think, and Juneteenth. So that was devastating. The definition of indirect impacts are business to business, which means that if a restaurant has a bread supplier, the bread supplier lost the order for that week because they were closed. So that's indirects are the loss to other businesses, and induced impacts are the wage loss. And so typically the way it works, for example, if you have an employee, they come to work and then they go have lunch somewhere else in the city. But that revenue is lost because they're not going out buying lunch. So the induced impacts represent and it's usually used a multiplier, which we'll get to in a minute. But those induced impacts result in loss of business and at any rate, those are accounted for in the study. The analysis accounted for lost revenue resulting from Father's Day closure. They looked at sales per square foot based on information from the International Council of Shopping Centers relative to average sales per type of business. They looked at the number of days impacted, and then they took another variable in this called lingering impact after reopening, which means that if businesses were closed and they reopened on a certain day, there was a period of time people may still have been somewhat distrustful of the safety. So there was lingering impacts that lasted for a period of time, and they made an estimate of that based on some multipliers. Good, next, yep. Lost wages. We estimated $450,000 for the 90 businesses, more or less, that we identified. And we were obviously very concerned about the challenge to wage earners. And the estimated lost wages through this study, independent of our analysis, came out to be $458,000. So we were pretty close relative looking at impacts, and that $5,000 for the week was a relatively fair guess. Okay. So they estimated losses from Father's Day, including Father's Day, of about $2 million direct. The lingering impact, which was changed behavior by consumers, meaning that they were concerned about safety, especially relative to restaurants. And that's not a commentary on the water district, that's just a commentary on how people behave in crisis. And that was estimated at a loss of about $563,000. So the total direct impacts based on this model was about $2.5 million. And those are direct impacts. The indirect impacts, that's business to business. Like I said, this study utilized multipliers provided by the United States Bureau of Economic Analysis, regional input-output analysis, specific to King County, Washington, and the indirect impacts are assessed at about the same $2 million. Concord Group ran different assumptions on on how to construct a model, but perhaps their most meaningful, which resembled actual impacts, was their assumption of direct revenue loss and indirect revenue loss based on the week of the actual close and lingering impacts in the following week. The aggregate economic impacts across different assumptions to length of time of business, closure and downturn, indirect impacts, lingering impacts, and the event on the low end, the variables come up with about $2.6 million, and on the high end, $5.1 million. And knowing economics to be the exact and precise science it is, I think we just go right somewhere in the middle, and that's probably a fair assessment. The estimate of the 5.1 assumes all businesses in the boil water impact were fully affected during the event and experienced lingering impacts based on changed consumer behavior the week following the event. And this analysis with the some of the modeling will be posted on our website tomorrow, and you're certainly welcome to use it if that's helpful at all with your insurers to make a case. The Concord Group is very well respected. They expedited this. They did it in about 10 days. And I think if you read it carefully, if you want to, it makes a pretty strong case for what their conclusions were. And I think that's all there is. Yep. Thank you.
Any questions before I go to closing statements? Councilmember Oxiger.
I'm just curious, and I recall specifically that Councilmember Pennington asked when we were considering directing the administration to look into this, that the question was, is this to explore or to implement? And the answer was to explore. How did we get from exploring to implementation without coming back through the council?
Well, I think there was like a 3-week gap until there was the next council meeting. Checking with our city attorney, he basically said you were directed to determine if it was possible to do. You determined that it was, and you did it.
Yet Councilmember Pennington's question was specifically about whether we were talking about implementation or exploring.
I don't recall. Councilmember Pennington.
It's on the video.
Well, would it have been your preference, sir, that we not do this?
It's a question of whether or not you follow procedure. And, you know, there was nothing that I think would have prevented us from scheduling an emergency meeting if necessary. But I think there were other questions that are involved too, in that, for example, you talk about the losses to businesses and the lingering effects. I'm sure there was loss of business to businesses that were outside of the Water District 54 area, because the communication going region-wide was that Des Moines has a boil water advisory. And it was not Des Moines, it was the Water District 54 portion of Des Moines. So it's a question of, you know, how do you really look at how you assess the damages and try to aid people. I'm just saying that if it had come back to the council, we might have been able to answer some of these questions. And I did ask twice this question and was not given any answer.
Sir, I can simply say I'm proud of our response, and I'll stand by it.
Councilmember Harris.
Just to refresh the council's memory, what fund is the $175,000 being drawn from?
From ARPA.
Councilmember Oxiger.
Okay, we allocate the ARPA funds, and earlier this year we had to make a reallocation in order to cover the passenger ferry. Where in the ARPA funds what monies were transferred, repurposed?
So Councilmember, I think, it's one of the nuances of emergency management, maybe you're familiar with, that this was an emergency. And we will come back to council with a budget amendment for the allocation of those dollars to help our businesses.
I'm sorry, but that doesn't explain which monies that you transferred. And it's not.
It was ARPA funds.
I understand it was ARPA funds, but the ARPA funds are specifically allocated. ARPA funds are not just an open pool that you can tap. There are certain distinctions that we have made as to where those monies are going.
All right. We're going to go ahead and move on. Anybody else have any more questions? All right, so we're going to move to closing comments, but I'm going to do something unusual. I'm going to allow our 3 electeds from the Water District. Also, I'll give you the opportunity to speak if you'd like to before I work around the room. And whether you do or don't, it's fine with me, but I just want to give you the option.
No, I wanted to say again, thank you again for the time and the care that you invested in putting together the after-action report. We did a similar process with the Department of Health as well, and we'll be looking at what kind of areas of improvement were identified in that document as well. Thank you for the time, and I hope it clarifies some of the challenges that the district faced in getting accurate information about what we were being required to do by the Department of Health.
All right. Councilmember Harris, I'll start with you.
Very little to say other than last week's meeting, sorry, waste of time. This week's meeting, I'm all about educating the public, but again, we are decision makers. And I would say that at least 90% of this material could have and should have been made available ahead of the meeting, both for ourselves and for the public. And, if people want to have a dialogue based on that, that's groovy. But I guess it's a study session and you should study or something. But again, this is supposed to be a dialogue, and at the risk of sounding cranky pants, this is not my idea of a fantastic meeting. But that takes nothing away from, again, thank you to the people from Water District 54. You have been incredibly gracious, and I'm very appreciative of you coming here and speaking with us. That's it.
Councilmember Oxiger.
Yes, I'd like to thank everybody that participated. It was extremely informative. I do have some concerns, though, as how we deal with process questions, and I think this is a learning opportunity, and I think we need to proceed positively as to how we're going to deal with such incidences in the future. Thank you.
Councilmember Steinmetz.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody as well. I learned a tremendous amount tonight, so I don't think this was a waste of time at all. And I'm glad that Water District 54 is here to share their side, because there's been a lot out there in the community that has been pretty negative, frankly. And I'm hoping that the community's paying attention tonight and understands what you were dealing with. So, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for agreeing to meet with Councilmember Pennington, and that turned out to be a very good, it sounds like very productive engagement, and I hope that in the future that will continue. Because I think that's very important. I'm also very pleased that the city was able to respond in the way that it did. I don't really have an issue with $175,000 being reallocated out of the ARPA funds in order to meet this, and I assume we'll see a budget amendment that reflects that, because that's generally how things are done on an emergency basis.
I'm going to go out of order and put you, Deputy Mayor Buxton, next from the tradition.
So, thank you, Mayor. I agree with my colleagues in the appreciation of you coming today and the sharing of information and the purpose of a study session and how this works out. I feel very thankful for the information tonight. I would like to make a comment about communication in general, and it's such a moving target for all of us who are tasked with communicating on a regular basis all sorts of information. It's such a challenge. Even up to 10, 12 years ago, it was so easy. If you had a piece of information, you called the Seattle Times and your local newspaper if you have one, and that's it. You give them the statement. There's no assortment of communication, community pages. There's nobody blocking you with ad blockers or blocking you with firewalls or blocking, Right now, if we wanted to get news to every single person in the whole community, there's a bunch of people out there that don't want to be communicated with, even if you can communicate with them. So there is a huge assortment of challenges that continue to grow in our society when we are tasked with communication, and an entire assortment of modes that we can use. Now, I wish Bonnie could just get information, push a button, and everybody got everything, that she didn't have to spend 5 hours working it in every angle possible. And so I don't want to make excuses for the lack of the difficulties we face, either from our city or us as council members or these electeds here. But it is a challenge, and the communication industry continues to present us with more and more options. And you think that you spend a lot of money and pick a really good option, and next year it's outdated. So we are committed to it, and we are working hard. It is a deep concern to us, and I believe it is a deep concern to Water District 54. And I appreciate the collaborative nature of the talks before this meeting, and also in our next steps discussion, even in this meeting. I think as we move forward, communication is going to get better, and I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to these good relationships that we're building. So thank you to the community for your patience, for tuning in tonight if you did, and thank you for this collaborative attitude. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Nutting.
Thank you, Mayor. There's not much more I can add that hasn't already been said. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to Water District 54, everybody being here tonight. Time is precious. It's the only thing we don't get back in this world. So thank you all for being here, staff and everybody else. Thank you.
Okay, again, thank you to my colleagues and friends over at the Water District for working and coming to the table. At the dais, there was a lot of discussion about history, and we had some discussion about history in the Water District. Patty and I talked for quite a while. Where did all that start? We don't remember. We don't know. But it made it to, 2023 somehow. And, and so I'm glad this step is going forward. I'll be here for a little while longer, and then I'm done here at the end of November. I hope that this continues. I hope the collaboration continues, and I think we're set up to be able to do that. The City of Des Moines, City Manager Mathias, made emergency management a part of the city's culture. It wasn't that way, and you've heard me speak about that in the past, about the lack of regard for emergency management. And it's one of the differences between now and 10 years ago. It's important to the city. It's a part of their culture. It's a part of their fabric, and that's because of one guy. And empowering the emergency manager director, made a director of emergency management, and committed resources. The council committed resources. So, I'm proud of what everybody did. I'm proud of the city staff, and they should be commended for the rapid and decisive and efficient action to support our businesses. They had an immediate need. They supported them by providing liquidity and support to the wage earners that lost wages. And that's really important, because that says that the city values its businesses, it values the people that work here that help make the city be a healthy, viable city. So thank you to the city staff for that. We can't change the events of the past. You're never going to unring that bell. But what we can do is take responsibility for the future, and that's what we need to do. So thank you very much.
No, go ahead.
Did you want to? Oh. The response and the learning that went into upgrading our communication systems and having an emergency plan is all owed to some of the predecessors that we had and commissioners at the Water District, but primarily it's because of our staff. And between Eric Clark and Patty Clayton and Damian Wolkhausen, it's just really long. What is it? Wolkenhauer, thank you. They have combined just at the Water District over 50 years of experience and worked about 10, 12 days straight from about 6 in the morning to midnight in some cases. And the reason that we hit the target of getting out notifications within the 24 hours on a weekend is due to Eric, Patty, our volunteers like Beth Ann, some of the other volunteers in our community, some family members who help us out. And really, we wouldn't have been able to even have that level of response without them. And so it really is, I think, a different kind of feel. We have a great number of customers who come in and talk to us in person, and that Patty knows by name, Damian and Eric know on site. And it is a different kind of feel in terms of how they interact with a neighborhood public water entity. And so really much of the successes that are outlined here are because of the staff and the amount of time they put into this. So I want to say thank you. As an outgoing commissioner, it's been fabulous working with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're talking, which is a big step in the right direction, and we really appreciate your time and you guys coming here and educating us and what we learned. I think we learned what the business impacts really are. I think we've learned what the impacts to the residents are. Patty, I can only imagine what it must have been like with a bunch of papers on your desk and the phone ringing off the hook. And so thank you for your efforts. I'm sure it wasn't easy, and you gave me a better picture of probably the hell you were living for a few days, and appreciate your efforts. But I go the same with our Chief Administrative Officer, Bonnie Wilkins, who was very quick to help get the word out where possible. And I want to say thank you. Shannon, I want to thank you for what you did already and what you're going to do in the future. The emergency preparedness training that you guys will receive is valuable. It really teaches us as elected what our roles are, and it really defined for me where I need to be, when I need to be, and so forth. And I think you'll find it very interesting. And then the order of things, of how they should work. Eric, pleasure to meet you. And I'm sure that, sitting in the hot seat like you were, I'm sure it was no fun. But thank you for all your efforts, and appreciate your partnership. And of course, I do have to thank Councilmember Pennington. I want to thank Michael and the staff for supporting. I do agree that our monies were about responding fast. We understand you are going to help with the insurance companies on the business and so forth, but we know they take too damn long. And the efforts by City Manager Matthias and his staff, and Rochelle in particular, to get money into their hands when they needed it most, it actually ended up, let's say in the end, it'll be a team effort to resolve the issue. With that, our next meeting will be a regular council meeting on September 7th at 6 p.m. And do I have a motion to adjourn? God, I have so many. Everybody, we'll just put it that way. All those in favor, raise your hand. Meeting is adjourned.